Welcome. I'm Doug Morgan, and you're listening to Uncommon Sense, where we hunt for the truth in the topics you're not supposed to talk about, Christianity and politics. We have seen a lot of political violence in this country in recent years. It has unfortunately been mostly from one side of the political perspective. And I have often said that conservatives have a distinct edge in the political debate, being that they mostly come from the side of truth. And when it comes to debates, facts are on our side. What happens when you have lots of debates is that you resort to other things like name calling, intimidation, and even violence. When we hear that conservatives are awful people and the president is Hitler and even ICE is the Gestapo, well, what do we expect? From an article written by Jacob Falek of the Daily Wire, he says, America was shaken by the tragic assassination of Charlie Kirk, founder of Turning Point USA, at the hands of a left-wing radical in Utah on September 10th. Kirk, a devoted husband, father, and man of faith, was remembered over the past weekend by tens of thousands of supporters who filled an NFL stadium in Glendale, Arizona, for his memorial service, with millions more watching online. In the aftermath of his assassination, however, a national debate has erupted over the rising wave of left-wing violence in this country. Stepping in as guest host of the Charlie Kirk Show, Vice President J.D. Vance addressed the issue head-on when he said, "We have to talk about this incredibly destructive a movement of left-wing extremism that has grown up over the last few years, and I believe is part of the reason why Charlie was killed by an assassin's bullet." Well, Vice President Vance is right. Over the past decade, America has witnessed a disturbing surge in left-wing violence. In fact, a new Daily Wire exclusive report just revealed that the suspect in the attempted assassination of Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh identifies as a transgender woman. The violence is real and is now showing up in a myriad of locations. Here are just a few of the most alarming examples. How about the congressional baseball game shooting? On June 14th of 2017, a gunman opened fire during a practice for the annual congressional baseball game in Alexandria, Virginia. The shooter, 66-year-old James T. Hodgkinson, wounded 4 people. House Majority Whip Steve Scalise, Capitol Police Officer Crystal Griner, the congressional aide Zach Barth, and lobbyist Matt Micah. The attack sparked a 10-minute shootout between Hodgkinson and responding officers from both the U.S. Capitol Police and the Alexandria Police. Hodgkinson was eventually shot by police and later died from his injuries. And Scalise and Micah were transported to local hospitals where both required surgery. Hodgkinson was a left-wing activist from Belleville, Illinois, with a criminal record of domestic violence, and the Virginia Attorney General concluded the attack was, quote, an attack of terrorism fueled by rage against Republican legislators, unquote. Well, we can turn to the 2020 George Floyd riots, right? Throughout 2020, left-wing riots spread across the United States, affecting over 2,000 cities. The unrest began on May 26th of 2020 in Minneapolis, following the death of 46-year-old George Floyd during an arrest related to a counterfeit $20 bill. Floyd had an extensive criminal history that included numerous drug offenses, criminal trespassing, armed robbery of a family, and counterfeiting. The Hennepin County Medical Examiner autopsy reported that Floyd had 11 milliliters of fentanyl in his system at the time of his death. In the subsequent trial of Officer Derek Chauvin, the defense cited this, along with Floyd's other health conditions, as contributing factors in his death. Chauvin was still found guilty, and apologists for the nationwide violence continued to claim Floyd's death was a case of police brutality. Of course, it wasn't, right? At the conclusion of the violence, 19 people lost their lives. Over $2 billion in damage was reported, and over 10,000 people were arrested. How about the attempted assassination on Donald Trump? That wasn't long ago. On July 13th, in fact, of last year, Donald Trump, former president of the United States, and current, obviously, president, but at that time, just former president, and presumptive Republican nominee at that time, the 2024 presidential election, survived an assassination attempt while speaking at a campaign rally near Butler, Pennsylvania. Trump was struck and wounded in the upper right ear by 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks, who fired 8 rounds from an AR-15 style rifle from the roof of a nearby building. And the attack also killed one audience member, firefighter Corey Coppertone, and critically injured 2 others. While information about Cook's political leanings remains seemingly contradictory due to his status as a registered Republican, we do know he donated to a Democratic cause through Act Blue, was bullied in high school for wearing a mask after COVID-19, and attempted to assassinate Donald Trump, and of course tried to assassinate Donald Trump, the most important conservative figure of our lifetime. And it's not exactly a stretch to classify him as a perpetrator of left-wing violence. Well, in 2019, Tacoma ICE Detention Center was attacked. It was on July 13th of 2019. The Willem van Spronsen, a Dutch-born immigrant and left-wing activist, attempted to firebomb the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Detention Center in Tacoma, Washington. He was shot and killed by police while trying to ignite a propane tank. And according to police, Van Spronsen identified as an anarchist and claimed affiliation with Antifa. Van Spronsen had written a manifesto outlining why he attacked the ICE facility. And in the document, he declared that, quote, "It's time to take action against the forces of evil," unquote. The rise of left-wing violence is alarming, though not surprising, of course, since President Trump's 2016 campaign, left-wing politicians, pundits, and activists have consistently labeled right-leaning figures as extreme and inflammatory terms. The Daily Wire show comparing Trump not the Daily Wire, the Daily Show, comparing Trump to Hitler, to Democratic mouthpiece Harry J. Simpson, calling Charlie Kirk a racist piece of trash who should just put the Klan hood on. The deceptive strategy has been just persistent. So my question here is, what is fueling all of this hate? I mean, it's definitely something to consider, right? Well, Greg Hurwitz, he is the New York Times #1 internationally bestseller of 26 thrillers, including the Orphan X series. Greg also wrote comics for AWA, DC, and Marvel. And he says that Charlie Kirk was an alt-right extremist. Certainly, that's what many in the so-called mainstream conclude from the collection of carefully culled remarks we are being fed by the algorithms designed to maximally outrage us. These uh, uh, these preternaturally powerful algorithms are fueled by bot armies, bad faith domestic players, psychopathic social media business practices, and hostile foreign regimes that seek to divide America, he says. How many hours of original Charlie Cook footage do you think the algos have from which to select? An AI breakdown of Mr. Kirk's content between podcasts, radio shows, YouTube videos, speeches, debates, and interviews estimates the total time somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 hours. We put this in the context of a job, assuming an 8-hour workday with no breaks, and that translates to 625 to 1,000 consecutive workdays. At the upper end, that is 2 years and 9 months of talking. That's even more than me. How many moments, he says, of this man's life have people watched before making up their minds that that his assassin must be qualified or even celebrated? Suppose deep machine learning casts its all-powerful eye on the last 8,000 hours that any of us spoke to, find out of context moments to just maximally denigrate, vilify, and dehumanize us. Do we really believe our character couldn't be assassinated just as readily? Do we really believe anyone's reputation could survive that level of scrutiny and cherry picking? Yours? Mine? Our family members, classmates, and colleagues? The leaders we support? The athletes and musicians we admire? Of course not. But this is the world that we've built and allowed. And now it is clearer than ever. Ours is a radicalized culture, a culture that reduces people to their mistakes, jokes, stupid remarks, contradictions, hypocrisies, blind spots, and consensus assertions. It's a culture that allows zero tolerance for being human, a culture that views legislative political disagreement as an us versus them battle with existential stakes, that demonize the opposition and views them not as factions and individuals, but as monolith. Why is it radical? Because it remains ossified and immovable, allowing neither nuance nor learning. A quick online spin shows us that the ways that Charlie Kirk, a complex and good man, imperfect like every last one of us, has been hammered flat and dehumanized. He's racist, despite running a young black leadership summit for years, despite his avowed and articulate admiration of black luminaries like Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington and Thomas Sowell, despite his mentoring of young black men, activists and leaders, and despite his voter mobilization efforts for the black community. He's anti-gay, despite welcoming gays into the conservative movement with love and grace, despite his taking fire from actual homophobes and arguing to persuade them, despite his deep friendships with many gay people. He's transphobic, despite his multiple kind and respectful discussions with trans students in which he welcomed them and encouraged them toward health and meaning. He's a misogynist, despite the fact that he ran a young women's leadership summit, evaluated women on his podcast elevated women on his podcast and events, and encouraged women to engage politically, uplifted female chapter leaders and ambassadors, and spoke to podcast audience, which at times skewed 60 to 65% female. He's a violent extremist, despite his countless denunciations of violence and coherence, despite his refusal to fight when challenged, despite his exemplification of debate and discourse. He's alt-right, despite the fact that his opinions were not far from average Catholic and Christian views from a single generation ago, despite the fact that he was a bulwark against extremism on his own side, despite the reality that he was hated by Groypers and Nazis and terrorists and white supremacists. There seems to be a genuine belief among many that everything Charlie Kirk did was for power and manipulation and control. A belief that his movement is all grift and corruption. A belief that for him and everyone in his orbit, and what an orbit it was, there was no wisdom, no grace, no care for people or the nation. Nothing genuine. Only just an evil takeover, plans for an evil takeover. How does this happen? Our radicalizing media and social and otherwise has strangled our curiosity, forbidding exploration of opposing notions, ideas, and thinkers. It tells us that we cannot risk contamination with information that might prove nuance and context. It tells us that everyone seeking to offer a different perspective is captured and brainwashed, not to be trusted. It tells us that if we modify our position, we will only be outcast as a traitor, a despot, and one of them. We all know the feeling, a stubborn ping in our chest, a compulsion at the back of our lizard brain that whispers, I'm not on the right side of this issue. I just know it. I'm on the right side of history. I just know it. He's a bad guy. I just know it. I don't need to see or hear anything else that might disprove or alter my opinion. I just know it. I just know it and won't be told otherwise. That is what radicalization sounds like. Terrifying to see in a mirror, terrifying to be shameful, and it prevents many from gazing with open eyes and an open heart on the tableau that can only be described as biblical. A husband and father shot before his wife and young children at a free speech event on a college campus beneath a sign that said, "Prove me wrong," in front of 3,000 kids, live streaming to tens of thousands more. Terrified by the gunshot, his 3-year-old daughter ran to him crying, "Daddy." What would have been our overwhelming national reaction to this moment in a time before social media and cable news? Not moral confusion, political expediency, certainly not gleeful malice. The difference between then and now is our widespread radicalization from being fed selective information 24/7. This is what it looks like. It looks like us, and it will destroy America if we don't stop it. Because when we are blinded by radicalization, we're also blind to who our real enemies are. Our foreign adversaries are feeling this division, profiteering. Social media companies with teams of addiction specialists are laser focused on exploiting our kids. Nihilists who wish only chaos, pain, and destruction. There are alt-right extremists. Charlie Kirk was not one of them. He was the embodiment of how you teach conservative young men and women not to become alt-right extremists. When challenged to fight by a grown man in front of 2,000 kids, Charlie said this. He said, quote, "The only thing that is preventing us in this country from going to civil war is debate and dialogue. In fact, a mark of civilization is that we don't have to go to blows and bullets, that we can have discourse and debate. We are going to remain peaceful," unquote. Again and again, since the 10th of September, he says, "I've been told Charlie was part of the problem. He was a peddler of hate. He said some horrible things." Do you really want to defend him? What? That is not a good hill for you to die on. Is it? For a man I never met? For a thinker I considered to be on many topics a beneficial adversary? For the principles he espoused: debate, not fists; discussion, not bullets; gratitude, not grievance; love, not hate. Yes, it is. This is a hill for us to die on, just like he did. And I would say that, not agreeing with everything that he has to say or he believes, I thought it was really good in how he perceived Charlie Kirk here. But there is more that fuels this fire than just that. That doesn't completely answer the question now, does it? And so I wanted to bring to you lastly this article from Kendall Teets. He is an investigative reporter for Defending Education. And he says this. He said that during the summer months, educators across the country flock to professional development conferences, often on taxpayers' dime. These events are supposed to sharpen the instructional skills of teachers and equip them with new methods for helping students succeed, addressing real challenges of education, such as declining test scores and reading comprehension and math proficiency. But as Defending Education's analysis of the programming shows, what actually dominates these conferences is not literacy strategies or math interventions. Instead, the recurring themes are race, social justice, gender, activism, and equity. From English to math, and from history to science, the same ideological buzzwords surface again and again. It's little wonder parents are concerned, or that the nation has grown more politically divided. Take the National Education Association, the NEA, the country's largest teachers union. At its conference on radical and social justice in Portland, Oregon this summer, activism, not academics, took center stage. Unions like the NEA make no effort to hide their contempt for Donald Trump and the values of his supporters. At its annual representative assembly, the union approved business items labeled Trump's agenda as fascist and opposing efforts to eliminate the Department of Education, which it called racist and anti-democratic. In direct response to a Supreme Court decision affirming religious parents' rights to opt their children out of LGBTQ curricula, the NEA allocated $209,000 to push back and expand LGBTQ advocacy in schools. In total, the NEA committed more than $340,000 toward initiatives designed to counter conservative policies. The union-driven activism is not confined to Portland. Across the country, teachers are being coached to use classrooms as platforms for reshaping opinions on society's most sensitive issues. Students are not simply taught about history or literature. They are encouraged to become activists themselves. The worldview behind this approach borrows heavily from Marxist theory, framing society as an endless struggle between oppressors and the oppressed. That lens is being embedded into lesson plans, teacher training, and classroom culture, gradually shifting education away from its original purpose, academic instruction, toward political re-education. The sessions at NEA's conference illustrate this shift. One workshop was entitled Building Narrative Power for Education Justice. It trained teachers to use storytelling to fight anti-truth and anti-LGBTQ legislation. Another warned about, quote, white Christian nationalist forces, unquote, allegedly exploiting Pan-Asian communities. Additional sessions covered racial battle fatigue, and blurred lines between racism and ableism, and framed climate change as disproportionately harming communities of color and women and students with disabilities. One even linked the MAGA movement to Jim Crow and native land theft. Teachers were urged to affirm transgender student identities and disrupt curriculum challenges and fight political opponents under the banner of education justice. The conference also promoted the NEA's pronoun guide, which encourages teachers to adopt non-traditional pronouns such as z, zer, self, and others, and to display their own pronouns as a sign of being a safe person. Misgendering teachers, were told, it's itself a form of marginalization. While parents worry about declining math and reading scores, union-sponsored teachings are focused on dismantling ableism and confronting white Christian nationalism and embedding queer theory into K-12 classrooms. These are not the priorities of most American families, but within the union bubble, they are treated as urgent and non-negotiables. And it's not just the NEA. The National Council of Teachers of English, the NCTE, filed its 2024 conference, filled the conference with sessions such as disrupting the canon of LGBTQIA plus themes, and queer and trans affirming education, and anti-racist pedagogity workshop, in a perfect example encapsulating how this ideology makes its way into the classroom. One teacher at a school district in New York framed Shakespeare's A Midsummer's Night Dream as a cli-fi or climate fiction text, using the play as a vehicle to teach climate change. Math education has not been spared either. The National Council of Teachers of Mathematics in the 2024 conference features sessions on anti-racist math, whiteness, and social justice. And then we wonder why math scores are going down. One session reflecting on my whiteness describes math itself as white patriarchal space and offers strategies to confront the oppressive forces of whiteness and dismantle inequitable practices. in the classroom. Yeah. Another highlights how black women in math education disrupt systems of oppression and center black girl joy. A third, Democracy and Data, claims math should be used to advance democratic participation through a social justice lens. The American Federation of Teachers, the AFT, follows the same script. At its July conference, sessions focused on radical harm and LGBTQIA plus allyship. Climate activism was there, and mass mobilization training. Teachers were also told to resist curriculum oversight as a political attack. In one session, the AFT admitted the obvious. The pandemic had a devastating effect on students' literacy. Yet, the same union that now bemoans literacy loss was a key player in lobbying to keep schools closed during COVID. A decision that fueled the very learning setbacks reflected in the 2024 National Assessment of Educational Progress scores. And if you look at even the scores before the pandemic, they were going down. But this is despite $190 billion in federal COVID-19 relief funds. So I guess what we're saying here is that this is kind of a multi-headed monster. That our culture, the culture that we have here, that allows for this left-wing violence to rear its ugly head, that encourages it, that demands it at times, is not just from one particular group or movement or union or whatever. It comes from a number of different factors, all doing the same thing and all heading in the same direction. Liberals have to turn down the rhetoric and stop feeding the fire of their violent left. And I would love to hear your thoughts on it. And you can always do that at uncommonsensepodcast.com. Go to YouTube, if you would, please, and just like and share. That always helps. Thank you for listening. This podcast is a production of Morganite Communications.